Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm your host, web producer Ben Strano, filling in for the vacationing Tom McKenna. With me this episode are Executive Art Director Mike Pekovich.
Hey, guys.
And Special Projects Editor Matt Kenny.
Hello, everyone.
And as always, the unsung hero Jeff Rose manning the cameras. And unlike our brethren in the newly established Fine Home Building podcast, we pronounce your name correctly, Jeff.
It's Jeff. Not Geff.
Jeef.
Yeef.
Good job so far, Ben.
Thank you.
Yeah, so far you haven't messed up.
Well,
So they
two.
think. Yeah. On the edit.
they'll hear it at the end. All right. So before we get started, we've got a little business to take care of. This episode of Shop Talk Live is brought to you by Tight Bond Quick and Thick Multi-Surface Glue, the thickest, fastest drying water-based glue available. In fact, it's 2 times faster and 3 times thicker than traditional PVA glues. Tight Bond Quick and Thick is ideal for woodworking, home repairs, and craft projects. It can be used with porous and semi-porous materials, provides a strong initial tack, and allows for realignment of workpieces. Visit tightbond.com/quick and thick to learn more.
Well, normal PVA would get about 10 or 15 minutes of open time.
Depends.
So this is 2 to 3 times, 2 times faster, 3 times thicker. So you better get your glue ups going.
Well, I wonder if it means the open time is less or the
Like clamp time.
The clamp time is less.
Sounds like it's more general duty, all around repairish kind of glue.
It's thick and quick. The newest glue from Barry White. And it just cost us a sponsor.
Yeah. We have had one sponsor complain about the banter.
We have
Yeah.
Really?
I heard.
the banter in general because it's asinine or specific to the product.
I mean, that's probably a general statement.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. We also need to remind everyone to visit finewoodworking.com to keep up with the tool giveaway for our 40th anniversary. The current prize is a set of Veritas bench chisels from Lee Valley. To win, you must enter by July 11th. To enter, go to finewoodworking.com /40 sweeps. That's 40 sweeps. And I need to apologize to about 700 listeners. I uploaded last episode and had 2 tracks of Matt arguing with himself.
I see no need for an apology at all. That sounds wonderful.
So if you downloaded it, if you're one of those 700 people and downloaded it and found it unlistenable, please re-download it. It should be fine now.
That's a case of too much of a good thing.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
I mean, that's probably what's like in your head at all times.
It was 4, but...
So shall we get started with the questions?
Let's.
All right. This one is from Mike Broom. I don't know.
Broom.
I have, and I'm sure this birthday has come and gone because this has been sitting in the vault for a while, but I have a birthday coming up, and my wife has seen the wisdom of getting me a Lee Nielsen bench plane. I'm looking at the number 4 smoothing plane. Is the number 4 good first choice? Most of my work is with machines, and hand tools are used for finer work. So I see this plane being used for surface prep and fine tuning. Secondly, the plane is offered in bronze, which looks good, is heavier, and doesn't rust. However, the website says it may leave marks on the wood, especially if it's not used daily. What are your thoughts on cast iron versus bronze?
Number 4 is definitely a good first choice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Go with that. I have the cast iron, Mike. You have the bronze, right?
I do. Yep. I have the cast
In
iron
one
number
corner.
5. So I've got both. I like the bronze. I like the mass of it. It's heavier and also, and this could just be my imagination, but it just feels like a little deader, like, anti-vibration. I've always liked it. I've never really had a reason to consider getting a different kind. It's great. The little marks it leaves, it can leave little black smudges.
But you have a plane in your hand to remove those with.
Yes, but when you use the plane to remove them, it leaves new ones.
Is it
No, it
that
doesn't.
consistent?
No, it only leaves it when the iron is not set. When the iron's not cutting, that's the only time it leaves it. So, as you're setting the blade, and if you haven't used a plane for a long time, as you're taking a couple passes before the blade is actually contacting, it might leave just some very light black streaks, but once the blade starts cutting, they always disappear. So I think it's a non-issue.
Okay.
So I think hopefully rust is not an issue. Let's say that you're not getting the bronze plane because everything else in your shop is rusty, then I think you have a bigger problem.
No, I would lean towards the bronze plane because in my old shop, in my basement shop, rust was a huge problem on everything. And if there was a rust-free option, I'd absolutely pay more for that.
Ben's old shop was in a swimming pool out back.
Saltwater, yeah.
Saltwater swimming pool.
It was in the bayou.
Yes. I like the cast iron. I kind of like that. It's heavy, but it's not too heavy. And cast iron gets a nice patina after a while, So, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Either one of them is going to be a fantastic tool.
Yeah.
Agreed. So no debate as to whether to start with number 4. That sounds,
none.
Yeah.
No. In fact, I got a question. Someone said I wanted my first plane. I was thinking about a 4.5 and blah, blah, blah. And I think a 4 is a better choice than a 4.5, and went on to why. And the answer was, yeah, thanks, but I'm going to get a 4.5. So, okay.
Some people are just sad on the wing. So, yeah.
It's like, all right, why'd you ask?
A 4.5, it's a really good smoother, but it's wide, it's really heavy, and it's a beast. I think if you get it as a dedicated smoother, there are some advantages, but as an all-around general use smoothing plane that you're going to use to prep all your parts and stuff on a daily basis, it was too big.
Yeah, number 4.5 is like really a dedicated super duper smoother where you have the mouth set up for the smallest of shavings.
Maybe a steeper frog.
A steeper frog. And a 4, what's nice about a 4 is that it is lighter and narrower and a little bit shorter. And so you can do things like open up the mouth and take a heavier shaving to maybe take some material off if you need to do that. It's better general all-around hand plane than a 4.5.
Yep.
Cool. All right, let's move on to question number 2. It's from Dan DeGennaro. My shop is taken up with woodworking tools. However, I also have more than a few mechanics tools, such as box wrenches, socket sets, taps and dies, hacksaws, etc. I'm curious if you store your mechanics tools in a separate location or if you have a permanent place for them in your woodworking shop.
I like this question because it's true. I differentiate between my woodworking tools and non-woodworking.
Yeah.
And I used to have like a really beat up sort of Sears Craftsman toolbox, like the metal kind with the handle on top for all those tools. But I since switched when I redid my shop. I have one of those. It's really sort of a top portion of one of the Craftsman multi-drawer, toolbox things, and I have that on a little rolling base with the thought that a lot of those tools, if I'm going to use it, it's either going to be working on my car or working on my machines, and I can roll this thing around to wherever I need to go. I never roll it.
Well, and
You
working
also
on your
never
machines
work
part.
on your cars. You've never, ever worked on a car that you own.
That sounded so good.
You haven't.
Do you pop the hood when something isn't working right? You stare at it
no.
like everyone else?
Check the oil.
Okay.
Mike's the guy, he'll pop the hood when he's got a flat tire.
Mr. Kenny?
One, I have carpentry tools, home tools like for working on the house, and I do have some mechanics tools like socket sets and wrenches, and I keep all of those together in a little carry case because that way, if I need them in the house, I can just pick up that carry case, little open toolbox, and take that where I need it. And I'm talking there just about these quote unquote mechanics tools.
Because you're not working on your car either.
Lord, no. Man, my dad made me do change alternators, all that kind of stuff when I was a kid, and I'm like, forget that. I don't want to spend my time
And
doing that.
all new cars, they're like half plastic, half computer. How are you supposed to on a Saturday afternoon fix something without breaking something?
I wouldn't even change all that.
Most modern cars are just like Pez dispensers now. That
Yeah.
one's all right. So I keep all those together in a small portable toolbox that I can take around with me. But in my shop, there are certain tools that are not woodworking tools that you need to have around, like Allen wrenches and such. So for all of those, I just have magnets on the tool that needs it and just keep the tools that I need for that machine there so I don't have to go look for it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because you do need you do need sockets in the shop from now and to maybe adjust some Destaco style clamps or something like that. But it's not too often that I need a socket set in the shop.
But I mean, Allen wrenches, every tool has like 4 different sizes that it requires, especially a bandsaw.
You just buy them and
just buy them. You can get them loose at a hardware store for like 55 cents or something like that, most sizes. And just keep them right there because if it requires any extra effort, you're going to put it off.
Yeah, and also you can get really, nice ones. Like, so for my joiner, which is a 12-inch joiner, and it has a ton of jib screws, and they're big and they're hard to turn. So I bought a T-handled wrench for that, and I just keep that magneted to the joiner base.
Magneted.
I don't know, magnetoed.
Yeah, that was a revelation for me, sort of like when the little caveman picked up like the jawbone of a whatever animal and hit someone with it and like invented the first weapon. The notion that you could have more than one of any type of tool in your shop rather than...
How is it possible that there's 2 quarter-inch Allen keys?
Yes. So I got open-end wrenches in my router drawer for the routers that didn't come with the wrenches. I've got the wrenches in my drawer where my joiner and planer knives are for that. I got my Allen wrenches on my bandsaw. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's decadent.
Yeah, it's not really, because it's like they're expensive,
Harbor Freight.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of tools, how's that for a segue? This host thing down. All right. It's time for all-time favorite tool of all time for this week. So who wants to start?
You start off, man.
All right. Because I brought a prop.
I know. So I want to know what that is.
Brought a prop.
All right. This is
where you keep your beads and your notions for your jewelry making.
This is from Lee Valley. It is an Allit, ALLIT, little toolbox organizer thing.
Wow. Did you print out those labels?
I did. I've got a little label maker. Come on. You don't?
I do not. I'm going to get one now. That would have been my favorite tool of all time.
Are you serious? You don't have one?
Because I would do this in all my little screw holding boxes.
Yeah, that's a little embarrassing. That should be
Handwritten little things that you scraps of paper.
But basically, this is like the little organizers that you find in any box store or Harbor Freight or whatever, but just really nice and high quality. And the thing that I like about them is that there's the removable bins that you can take out and bring to whatever you're doing. You don't have to bring the whole thing. And they're nicely made. They're solid. There's 3 different size bins, and Lee Valley sells the bins separately too.
Nice.
So you can load it all up with the small ones, all with the medium.
And they're sized in multiples, which is nice.
And it's just how I organize all my little screws. And we just moved into our house, so I started unpacking stuff, and this was one of the first things I pulled out to start hanging up pictures and whatnots. And it's a little bit decadent. They're like $17 a piece, but organization's worth it for me.
Nice.
Especially screws.
Nice.
Like having, being able to reach into a box and pull out a number 6 by 5/8 without thinking twice.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing, and so, I would love to get maybe 4 or 5 more. I have 2 right now.
I've been feeling that provides a certain insight into the way your brain works. If you have this and a label maker and you've gone through the trouble of labeling every single one of those, and I bet all the right screws, they're not mixed up at all.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Ben has some issues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I worked in many a hardware store, and so the idea of screws being in the wrong bin physically gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Wow, you must have to stay clear of Home Depot.
I will start reorganizing.
Where if I don't find what I need, I know I'm going to find it somewhere else where it's not supposed to be.
The worst thing about certain places you go to, and you need like X number of screws, and so you go to that bin and you pick them out, and then when you get home, it used to. Now I always check it. You would get home and one of them would not be the right size. It would be something different because some bozo put it in there.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, or other places that you buy screws at a lot will have them packaged in, 6, and you need 8.
Yes.
The little hanging package. Oh God, that drives me nuts.
I have a rolling cabinet with drawers, and the top drawer I can pull out, and I have all my little McFeely's square drive screw. And they come in the boxes, and they have the labels on the end, and
That's
they just
the dream
all
right
end
there.
up.
That's
so I
the
can
dream.
see as soon as I open that drawer.
Here's something I did. This is the second revelation. This was very hard. I don't know if you've brought yourself to this point or not. Like when you are putting together like a piece of IKEA furniture or an office chair or anything that ships with a certain number of screws and bolts, there's always a couple extras. And it's like, well, this is perfectly good. I have to put this away. No.
Chuck them.
I throw them away.
Yeah,
They're
chuck
gone.
them.
And it would kill my dad because he says, you're throwing away a nickel right there. It's like, don't care.
Yeah, the last thing I need is a giant Tupperware of random screws and nuts that I will never use.
In most likely metric sizes.
Yes.
They're not going to fit any bolt that you have.
Now, this organization that you like,
Yes.
and brings me back to the question that the mechanical tools question, because I have containers like that for screws, and so this weekend I was doing working on my bathroom in the one of the bathrooms in the house, and we needed some ceramic like waterproof screws, stainless steel or something like that. So I had some deck screws that are painted or ceramic coated, and they take a special driver. And I started to look through my little box of drivers and stuff. Then I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm reasonably smart. I looked back in the bin with those screws, and that's where I put the special driver.
Right on.
You might be giving yourself a little bit too much credit because these days the screws come with the.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the driver that came with the screws.
Okay,
So
all right.
instead of putting it in general storage with all my other bits, I put it just where I would always need it, and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's smart.
Don't get sassy now.
Well, and back to Mike's point about throwing out loose screws. If I need 8 6x1" wood screws, I buy 100.
Yes.
I don't buy loose screws anymore. I just buy the box.
Yes, that's,
the box.
Yeah,
Yeah.
buy the box. Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, absolutely. All right, who's next?
Go ahead, Matt.
Want me to
Hopefully
go?
it's about woodworking and not about home demo.
I think Ben doesn't. He's not really sure where he works right now.
Well,
It's
you
fine.
said you're working on your bathroom, and one former editor was guilty of always bringing up impact driver, favorite tool of all time of the week. It's like,
Yeah.
Those were wood screws.
Yeah, you're right. So, no, mine. I always abide by the rules. A favorite tool. Don't look at me
Because you make the rules up as you go.
Because I know someone who's going to go after me today is bringing up some kind of lame tool.
I may be changing it as we speak.
All right. So my favorite tool of all time this week is my Tight Mark Mini marking gauge.
There's such a thing.
Yes. It's only about 6 inches long or something like that, as opposed to the normal size one, which is big. I originally had bought it to use as a mortise gauge. So I bought it with all the little mortise wheels that they have for it.
Okay.
And because I have always made my own marking gauges, and they have a knife in them. And I really like the knife, a cutting gauge as opposed to a wheel gauge or pin gauge. But I was teaching at a place called Peters Valley Craft Center recently, and I needed to, we were doing dovetails, and I needed multiple setups, and I ended up setting that up for one of my students to use to do some layout. And I was like, man, this thing's fantastic. 'Cause I had never really used it for, dovetails or something like that, for shoulders. And it is awesome because it really is sharp. The problem I've had with other wheel gauges is that they were not sharp. They would more dent the wood.
Right.
But the Tight Mark absolutely cuts the wood. And I should have known that because the mortising wheels are fantastic. They really slice the fibers and not dent them. And it's small, but it has a nice weight, and it has a little, it has the Microjusta feature to it. So
it has a smaller head than the larger Type Mark II?
I believe so. Yeah, it has a smaller head.
And the Microjusta feature on the Type Mark is phenomenal.
It's good, yeah, very good. So I've always liked it, but I've just not used it much because I bought it for that one particular reason, to do mortises. And to be quite honest, I don't really hand shop mortises very often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this brings up a question though. Does anyone actually sharpen wheel style marking?
I have in the past because I did not like the way that it was performing. So I would, you just lay it the flat side down on a stone and just rub it on the stone until it gets better.
I don't sharpen my Lee Valley because you can just buy replacement plates, and also that those tend to not get dull as much as roll off your bench and hit the ground. Like when I'm teaching, and they chip, and you have to kind of keep twisting until you find one area that's still sharp.
But Mike, really, you're throwing out a nickel there. It should be sharpened.
The one I do have to sharpen, I have
How much are they?
I have a Bridge City gauge that is no longer made, and that one I have to sharpen. The steel's a little bit softer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love my Type Mark Mini.
Cool. So that's almost a story of Tool Bomb makes good.
Well, it's not a tool bomb because,
Well, it started out as something that you got, but that you never used. Something that.
But I did use it for mortises.
That you don't hand shop.
Do very often.
So, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I bought a flat back tape and then tried to use it to measure the distance of a room or something, and complain that it was a tool bomb.
Replacement wheels for gauges are $4.90 for the.
Okay, so my favorite tool of all time of the week, runner up, would have been my old Stanley plane, because I'm making some pine Japanese style toolboxes, and I like that lighter hand plane for like just going to town on pine, as opposed to my Lee Nielsen with a really tight throat. I have an old Bedrock with a hawk iron, open throat, and the lightweight plane just zips right through. So that was a lot of fun. That is not, however, my favorite tool of all time of the week, which is, I don't even know what it's called. It's that sort of shrink wrappy kind of packing tape stuff, like with the handle, and like it's like for, wrapping around stuff.
Oh yeah, Lee Nielsen makes that, right? Oh no, they don't, because it's not a woodworking tool.
So let me tell you
Mike
this.
forgot where he works.
Yeah.
Now
It's called plastic twine or something, isn't it?
I don't know.
I
Except
do everything around here.
some is good, some is not good. The kind that you get at a certain box store with the orange handle and it's green tinted is not good because it doesn't really roll out very well. Anyway, I am prepping to teach at Mark Adams in a couple of weeks, so I am getting a lot of stuff together. And the best way for me to get stuff together, jigs or story sticks or templates or odds and ends, is just shrink wrap them together. That's really awesome. That does not make it a good favorite tool of all time of the week for normal woodworking purposes, but it is really good for woodworking for this reason. And one of the reasons I'm using it now is because I am I'm making up certain, some stock for parts in class that we're not going to have time to sort of mill up there. So I'm kind of pre-milling up parts. 2 weeks later, a couple states away, humidity levels are really going to change between now and then. I want these things to stay really flat. And this is a common problem for a lot of woodworkers. If you're working on a project, you have to put it down for a week or two. You don't want to come back to drawer parts and then have them all cupped when you're trying to dovetail and you have to reflatten everything. The little shrink rack stuff is really good for just wrapping up parts together really, really tight. And even if you want to get a little piece of 1/4-inch MDF top and bottom on your stack of parts to really minimize as much moisture transfer between the parts and really lock them in straight over a longer term.
Without marking or marring anything.
Sure, right. I mean, you could get the old plywood and the cinder block on top. That's kind of a pain. So I really like that stuff for long-term stuff. And this is sort of a notion that I picked up from Bob Van Dyke, because, the notion is like when you're milling stock, you always sticker it to get even airflow around everything. But Bob's take on this is once it's milled to its final thickness and dimension, you don't want air going all over this. You want to really protect it and wrap it up. And I really picked up the shrink wrap technique from him because he wraps everything. If you don't want it to move, wrap it up.
Fully?
He will put
It
stuff
must have
in a
been miserable to be one of his kids.
he'll put stuff in a black plastic bag, like really. But I find that just getting things wrapped really, really tight together does a really good job of that. And then if you want to wrap around the end grain too, you can do that.
Although I am filing a protest after the podcast over this, I will say that
Tom's out. So.
yeah, one of the coolest things I've ever seen was we live near Waterbury, Connecticut, and there's a place called Tools Plus there.
Yes.
A great, they sell woodworking tools. And so I went there once to buy some parallel jaw clamps. And they said, well, we don't have them in the store, but they're at our warehouse. And the warehouse is just on the other side of Waterbury. It's like 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away. Huh. So they said, well, so I paid for them and I went there to pick them up. And I go there to pick them up and the guy lets me in. I go stand in the warehouse. And there they have one of these plastic wrap things, right? Except that it's not handheld and it's probably like 5 or 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
The shrink wrap is, and it's on a fixed arm. And then whatever you want to wrap, you put on this turntable that's on the floor. And then you turn the turntable on and it spins it around. And as it spins, it wraps everything in that plastic.
That's what Mike has.
Hey, Mike has that in the house now.
It's called twine tape.
Those are cool.
Is that stuff's called twine tape?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've never heard of that term.
I've never have either.
I've worked in many a hardware store.
I know you have. Twine tape. It doesn't actually even sound like an accurate descriptor.
That's
like,
no.
That's what Uline calls it.
It's like a giant saran wrap that's really strong.
Right.
And sticky. Yeah.
Cool.
I think it was invented by John Gotti, but I'm not sure.
Chris Cockner uses it for his skateboards.
Yes.
Wrapping up the packet, if you will. Have you ever used it before you put something in a veneer press? Or?
So to keep parts aligned for veneer pressing?
Yeah.
I never heard that.
I've not used it for that.
Because you do a lot of vacuum bagging, so.
Yeah, I've not used it for that. I used to use blue tape a lot, but the pressure that gets put on stuff, the blue tape is just, any kind of tape becomes almost impossible to get off.
Oh.
And you can end up ripping veneers and stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I've gone to simply not using anything, and it works all right. Maybe I'll try the plastic stuff.
Yeah.
See how that, it must work okay with, you can take it back off with even though all that pressure.
Yeah, I don't think it would adhere to it.
It's only sticking to itself, so.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go to another question. This one comes from Corey Morgan. Let's see. This one's going to have a lot of fun. Quick question for Shop Talk Live. Do any of you have another name for crotch figuring? I can't even say it without giggling. I work at a woodworking magazine.
Oh, it's just like, what? It's not so much that the term, it's just like, what a question.
I like to highlight this figuring in a lot of my wood, but hate having to say it to my clients. Oh, I was thinking it would be sweet to use some nice crotch wood on these fronts. You always get strange looks, the inevitable string of bad jokes, or the weirdest and worst. People think you are being suggestive. So what do you call this? Any direction would be appreciated.
Queen's Britches.
Queen's Britches.
Yes.
Why don't you just say figured wood?
Yeah.
You know?
My argument is that your client does not know whether you're correctly speaking when you say crotch wood or not. So you can call it anything. And,
you could call it spurtled maple. You know? They're not going to... I would just call it figured. You know? Woodworkers get into... It gets a little pedantic and tiresome when you start to hear, well, it's not figured maple, it's tiger maple, or it's quilted maple, or it's, or it's rowy maple.
I don't even know what that is.
Rowy's not maple. Rowy would be something like sapele. But it's kind of like, all right, yeah, we get it. It's all figured. But they do serve their purpose in describing different types of figure, but just call it figured.
At the lumber yard. Yeah. It makes sense to use those terms. But to someone who doesn't know,
right.
Don't drop the word crotch.
Right. You could call it armpit figure because,
some pit walnut.
Well,
walnut.
Or you could qualify it
Pit
really
crotch.
quickly within the same sentence. Like for the drawer fronts, I'm using, book match, crotch figure. That's where two branches come together, and all that reaction wood creates a lot of.
You have to say it really quick and
yeah, you
nervously.
just keep going. Keep on.
Crotch figure, which is.
Don't hesitate. Yeah.
Yeah. Once there used to be a guy at the magazine named Steve, and he and I once came up with a list of fictional figured woods.
This is gonna be good.
Well, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but like Walnut Hurl was one of them. And when I was writing my about my boxes, and I would just start making stuff up to see who was like really reading it carefully, if anyone was reading it carefully. So I came up with things like the spurtled heartwood of a quizzical pear tree. It's just making it. Call it that. I like that. A quizzical pear tree.
Call it flame.
Flame.
Yeah.
Yeah, Guitar World.
Because I've heard the term flame crotch, and I think that's just digging yourself a deeper hole. So call it a flame figure.
But flame normally doesn't apply to a crotch. That's more like it applies to another type of figure. It does.
It's all up from here, gentlemen.
All right. What's the next question?
Well, you're the one that picked the question.
Yeah, I know. Let's see. All right, here we go. We have a doozy now. This one is from John B150. I'm in the market for a miter saw. DeWalt has two cordless options. One is a 7 1/4 and the other is a 12-inch with the option to plug it in. Why do I need a 10 or 12-inch blade over a 7 1/4? And are the cordless options any good?
Well, first of all, you can cut wider wood with a bigger blade at a chop saw.
Yeah.
And or a miter saw, pardon me.
And if you need to like drive out to your log cabin and cut some wood and you don't have any power, cordless is awesome.
But if you're in a shop that is wired for electricity,
and you have an outlet on the wall in the vicinity
What are these
of your
modern
chop saw,
conveniences you speak of?
if you don't have electricity, just go get yourself a cross saw and a hipster, and you can do all the work you want to.
in a case of PBR.
In a case of PBR. But if you are a modern man in a shop with electricity, then you get a corded saw. You get a corded tool with a successful beard like mine.
So I think the real question when it comes to choosing a miter saw, do you want a 10-inch slider or just a 12-inch straight up and down guy?
Or a 12-inch slider?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's big.
That's really big.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go that way.
Or a radial arm saw.
Okay. So, just a stock 12-inch is going to give you a higher capacity. Like if you're doing crown molding and really high stuff and you need it. In most furniture, I don't know how often I use that. That's what I have. Because a past article recommendation said, well, get the 12-inch instead of the 10-inch slider. So I did, and I don't like it. I don't like it nearly as much as a 10-inch slider.
Really?
Because when you're bringing a 12-inch blade down, a lot of that blade is cutting simultaneously. You're dishing that out. So on a 6-inch wide board, at a certain point, 6 inches of that blade is in contact with the wood. And let's say you're cross-cutting that same 6-inch piece on, like, let's say a table saw, only just maybe an inch portion of the blade, only a few teeth at a time, are in contact with that wood. So on the 12-inch saw, I notice enough blade deflection to where I never get a perfectly square, accurate cut.
Yeah, but that's not where you use a chop saw.
Well, I mean, you can. However, on a 10-inch
John
slider,
is moaning right now.
a 10-inch slider works a lot like a table saw. When you pull it out, put it down, push it through, again, only a smaller portion of the blade is making a cut. I think you have more accurate cuts. The downside is you need a lot of sort of front to back space for most sliders. They have to come out from the wall quite a bit. So if you have a small shop or tight space, maybe the 12. But if you're serious, more woodworking than you are, say, trim carpentry, I wish I had a 10-inch slider.
I have a 10-inch non-sliding saw and consider it to be too small.
Here's why I like a slider.
Well, you need a 12-inch non-sliding.
Yeah.
I'll sell it to you and give me a 10-inch slider.
I might take you up on it. But yeah.
So
We'll talk.
I know people do use chop saws, miter saws for finish work, and that's fine. They can be set up to be accurate. would use, I have a radial arm saw, but have used chop saws here in the shop at the magazine and elsewhere, and I use them for rough work, right? You're roughing out a board to length before you begin to mill it.
Right.
And that means that the board may not be very flat.
Yeah.
And the problem with any type of chop saw, if the board is not flat, is that as you cut it, it can pinch the blade.
You can bind it, yeah.
And holy moly, is that a scary thing, right? When that blade gets pinched and that whole thing just jumps, it could be, it's freaky. What you can do with a slider, I found, is you very slowly slide it across the width of the board to cut a little deeper. And then as it starts to come down and pinch, you're recutting that curve.
Got it, right.
So that in a sense, it never really pinches.
Yeah.
And you can get through the whole board.
Yep.
So that's why you're arguing radial arm saw, or just sliding
No,
in general?
Sliding in general.
Right, but
yeah.
here's the thing.
Sliding arm saw you cannot do that with.
But the non-slider tends to not bind because it's coming straight down from the top. I've never bound with my non-sliding chop saw, but where I do bind is with a 10-inch. You pull it out, you push it all the way down, and you're making a full cut across like a 12-inch whiteboard. That's when it binds. So on one hand, lighter cuts with a slider prevents that. On the other hand, that type of saw is more prone to it. So it's kind of a wash, but good technique is important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to just quickly mention that if you are buying a cordless, I would look at the new DeWalt FlexVolt. I was at the DeWalt show. It was pretty amazing. So it did function like a corded tool. But I know you guys are going to scoff at that.
Well, battery-operated tools are fantastic. You just don't need one in a woodworking shop where you never move your tools away from the electricity.
But for $200 extra, you get the 2 batteries and it plugs into the wall.
Yeah, for $200 extra. For that $200, I could go out and buy one handmade Japanese paring chisel.
Touche.
That's the most hipster comment of the day.
For that $200, I could get that chisel and I could get some beard wax.
Okay. For your successful beard.
That's right.
All right, let's move on to the next segment, which is going to be all-time favorite technique of all time for this week.
All right. Mike, why don't you start? Is it wrapping stuff in plastic?
No, it's not. It goes back to a project I alluded to in the mention of my Stanley plane as my runner-up favorite all-time tool of the week, and that is I'm prepping to go travel, and whenever I teach, typically, it seems like every time I travel, I have to go to Home Depot and get a couple plastic bins with the lids to put stuff in.
Do you throw them out every time?
I don't, but like if it's a specific class, all the stuff lives in there and goes up in my attic and gets labeled wall cabinets, and all that stuff stays in there. So I need a new bin. And more specifically, I have my travel chest, which is on a rolling cart. The rolling cart has sort of an empty space at the bottom. And in the past, I've shoved a plastic bin down there, and it looks really ugly and it slides around. So I said, I'm going to make me a little storage box out of wood instead of a plastic bin to store down there. We're just doing an article with Andrew Hunter on a Japanese-style toolbox in pine. Number one, it's really cool. It's got this nice little sliding lid that locks in place with a wedge. But what's really neat is the construction is really dirt simple. I mean, you cut 4 mortises, 2 in each of the sides, and that's it. The rest, it's nails and butt joints. And it goes together really quick, and it's a really cool thing. So I guess my favorite technique of all time would be butt joints and nails. And you're supposed to use like the really cool Tremont, cut nails with the square heads.
But
I didn't have any. I did have some round head nails, so I just went to my little belt sander and I just filed all my nail heads square. Looks awesome.
He has artisanally made square head nails.
custom.
So,
Yes. How fascinating.
Yes.
Were they galvanized? Were they just like roofing nails that you?
They actually were galvanized, so I
nails.
sort of ground off the galvanized portion on the top of the head too, so it wasn't partly galvanized. Here's the one unexpected problem with that is that with the square head nails, you tend to want to align the nail head somewhat square.
You have to clock
your nails?
nail heads.
And on a cut nail, it's sort of self-squaring. But on a round nail, here's something interesting I never noticed with a round head nail. They actually twist as you hammer them in. I bet you didn't know that.
No.
They do. How do I know? Because I start them square and I watch this little square turn and twist as I hammer it in. Amazing.
How many people are going to test this now?
Well, you don't have to because that's...
Well, no,
there you go.
I'm curious. That's
Well, based on a small anecdote, it's true.
It was a lot of nails.
It's a lot.
That was probably, a good 20 or 30
Oh,
nails.
that's a lot of nails.
It is.
So
And
were
every
you
single
taking
time.
needle nose and straightening them out right before you drove it home?
No, I finally had to determine how much twist there is per inch of nail driving, and I just sort of clocked
you
in
have a chart?
reverse that. You kind of eyeball it.
Okay.
No.
You people are broken.
I was going to ask the home building guys if they ever custom file the nail heads for their projects where they use nails.
Yeah, they do that right before they put that coil of nails in their pneumatic nailer. That's what they do.
Fired 20 in 3
That's
seconds.
what they do.
All right. That's all I got.
You could ask them on their podcast.
You should.
Yeah.
Because they have a podcast now.
I should recommend it to them that they should try it. Next time they're like framing an addition.
All right, who's going next? Me?
Yeah.
All right. So mine is very simple, actually. Cutting a lot of dovetails recently, taught a class on cutting dovetails, and was just cutting some for fun in my shop.
What?
Yeah.
I hate cutting dovetails.
If you followed my Instagram feed, Mike, which is kenny.matt, you would know that I was recently cutting dovetails for
Are you
fun.
on Instagram?
I am, and I was just mocking Matt for his Instagram feed where he says something. Whenever I get a little down, I go into the shop and hand cut a dovetail.
I'm pretty sure that's not what I said. But anyways, it's so when you're cutting dovetails, when I learned to cut dovetails, I learned to chop out the waste with a chisel.
Yes.
And the guy that taught me to make furniture, I do not want to say anything bad about him because he's absolutely a wonderful person, a great guy, was unbelievably kind to me to teach me to make furniture and ask for nothing in return. But chopping out the waste of a dovetail is terrible.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
It's like,
It's the worst.
like, why are you doing that? So the coping saw in cutting out the waste between dovetails, either pins or tails with a coping saw, is my favorite technique of all time this week because it just makes the whole process so much faster and easier. And when you get good at it, you can cut out almost all of the waste and have just a bit of paring to do and just chip, 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 and you're done. And the one place where this doesn't really work, or so I thought, was half-blind tail sockets, right? So like the tail sockets on the drawer front for a half-blind dovetail.
Yes.
So, and this is where the beauty of ignorance sometimes. So I'm teaching all these students to cut dovetails, and the last dovetail we're learning to cut is completely hand cut, half-blind dovetails for a drawer. And up until that time, it had been through dovetails, and we've been coping out the waste. So this one guy who had figured things out enough, he had started working on his own, and he comes time to cut out the waste in the half-blind sockets, right? So I'm walking around the room and I see him with this, and I'm like, what is he doing? And I go over there, and he had somehow figured out how to get this coping saw into the half-blind socket and at the right angle and cut part of the waste out.
Okay.
Doing like that.
Create sort of a ramped.
Yeah, created a ramp thing. And I
Okay.
was like, oh, people don't do that. And I was like, but I guess you can. But then I don't think I would do it just because when you come time, you do have to chop the rest of that waste out.
Well,
and
you-
having that ramp there instead of a flat, I think would make it a little bit harder. But
If you get it wrong, too, it's very wrong.
yeah.
What I do in that, like when I'm teaching in that situation, I'll set up a drill press with a fairly small diameter drill bit and a little fence. So you butt up the end of the board against the fence, and you drill just a line of holes just adjacent to the baseline. And the idea isn't to remove all the waste, it's to just sever that end grain really close to your scribe line. So
Right.
then you sort of start by popping out right at the center of the diameter of the holes, you can really pop out all that waste, and you're left. It's just like coping. Then you're left with just that little 1/16 of an inch or less amount of waste to chop down. It's much easier.
Yeah. I mean, I know of that technique. I've always hesitated to do it myself because it seems like, well, by the time I go and set up my drill press to do this,
Right.
and then I do it, I could be done chopping out the waste.
Right.
Or usually, when I usually do half blind sockets, it's usually, excuse me, I do it with a router, and the board is vertical, and that's normally what I do because it's really fast, and you get that accurate shoulder line down there.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I guess that takes a while to set up too.
Yeah. Honestly, that the whole drill thing, I had been aware of that for a long time, and kind of like you, it's like, I'm not going to do that. That's dumb. I'm either going to route it or just chop it by hand. And of course, in a teaching situation where it's like, okay, let's multiply this times a lot of people in a lot of drawers, that's when I started to investigate, broke out the drill thing, and then it worked so well that, like, if I'm doing just a drawer or two and I don't want to set up the router table, I'll drill it first. I do like that. It's
so if you
quick.
drill all the way along that shoulder line for a socket, then you should be able to put the board vertical because you already have your cut, and you could pop out a huge amount of waste with just one whack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do it horizontally because I go down at the holes and then just pop it down.
Yeah. Here's something related, which maybe I'll say for the benefit of everyone, that every time I teach, there's always at least one person who doesn't really have much experience. This time it was 8 people. And when it comes time to use their chisels, you see a lot of guys doing the one-handed knife fight with their chisel, right? They're holding the handle, and then they're just trying to, pair with that one hand on the handle, and their other hand is usually in the path of the blade.
Yeah, holding the board opposite, right. Yes.
So that's dangerous in and of itself. But then I saw a guy trying to pair the vertical wall of a pin with and he just had his hand on the chisel, and he actually had a mallet too, and he was holding the mallet in the same hand as this chisel handle, and he was trying to come down. And
that's stacking the odds against you right there.
Not only was it the vertical wall of a pin, it was the vertical wall of the half pin on the edge of the board. So it's just like, you're going to split that thing off. So I see him, and I rush over, and I'm like, here's all the things you're doing wrong. Don't do that. And then I showed him that, when you're pairing, I always use 2 hands, right? One hand on the handle, and then the other hand holds the blade right up near the cutting edge, and I usually brace it against the wood. And you get lots of control that way. And you can also minimize any jump that might happen with it, right? Because you have a stop built in with your finger against the wood. So anyway, so I told this guy not to do that, and he didn't do it. And then, it's time to go to lunch, and I'm walking around, and I'm looking and checking on everybody, and I see he's got one of his boards there, and it's got a glue up going on, and I'm like, what happened? And I was like, oh, you did it before I even got over there. He's like, yeah. So he split off this huge piece of the board, because he whacked it with a mallet and trying to pair, with the grain on a pin.
Right.
So don't do that.
No, I mean, teaching is really, really tough. I used to have a really explicit demo where I would just talk ad nauseum about hand placement, technique, all this. And then by the time I'm done, I thought, these guys have it now. They're just going to go knock it out because I just explained everything perfectly. Mm-hmm. And then you get to their bench and a lot of bad things start happening. And I thought, wow, I'm like the worst teacher in the world. And I realized, you can only say so much. You can only take in so much watching someone do it, having them explain it before you get your hands on the tool yourself. So I kind of tighten up my demos a little bit, knowing I'm not saying everything you actually need to know, but then going around and then watching people use the tools, do the work, and then do those corrections there. Because I think it's much easier to get it when the tool's in your hand and you can explain it that way.
I mean, the one thing, anytime I'm using a chisel, I did it once, and I was holding something with the offhand and nailed my thumb, you know, and that is just that's like driving a car without a seatbelt for me. It just feels wrong. I'm constantly aware of keeping my hand behind that chisel.
Yeah.
I never that I see it on the internet all the time, and it just makes me cringe.
I mean, with the chisel, that's the thing is that I didn't really realize all that I did with my hands when I was paring or using a chisel until I started to teach, and then I started to realize, oh, you see someone doing something, and go, well, that's not how I do it. They shouldn't be doing it that way. And then you realize, oh, here's why I do it the way I do it, because
Right.
Putting your hand there gives you lots of control, and in the one-handed chisel, knife fight chisel hold, I see that all the time. And holding a chisel with one hand is you just don't get you can't use the tool properly.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, here's a question for both of you. Has teaching made you a better woodworker?
Oh, by far.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Because like Matt said, you do things and it works for you. You may not examine exactly why you do it. But then when it comes to having to explain people what you're doing, you do. For me, I kind of have to reverse engineer and really deconstruct my process and get to the point of why I'm doing it. And more often than not, I end up cleaning up my own processes, because there's a lot of things where, yeah, I can futz my way through this, but
If you have to get 10 people through it,
then I'm going to really figure this out. And once I figure it out well enough to explain it, I'm doing it that way for sure. And also my knowledge of why I'm doing it, what's happening, increases quite a bit. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was familiar with that phenomenon before I started woodworking. When I was teaching as a college professor, one of the things I taught a lot was logic, deductive logic, and I became infinitely better at deductive logic through teaching it than I ever did studying it. And the other thing was the ancient Greek. It wasn't until I really started teaching ancient Greek that I really, really started to understand the language. And it's the same with woodworking. It's the same with anything. I think if you have to explain yourself and the reasoning why you do something, you'll become better at it.
Yeah.
So with that, Ben, please explain to us. No.
I'd have to do a lot of explaining. I'm going to skip my technique. Because I was just going to regurgitate something from Bob Van Dyke anyway. I have not been in the shop for a month.
It wasn't going to be storing screws and a little organizer?
Well, you're jealous. You know it.
That is a nice one.
It's a nice organizer. It is nice.
That is kind of a tool and technique.
There you go. Yeah. I know exactly where they are. All right. Let's see. Let's see. This question is from Dave, and we're in Shop Talk Live 112. Mike mentioned something about the speed square trick, and this is in reference to the shooting board discussion that we had. I too have tried using a speed square in my quest for the perfect 45-degree miters, but found it shifted around too much, and the wide edge of the square caused it not to sit flush on the board. A speed square with a known perfect 45-degree seems like an obvious tool to use, but I'll be if I should I edit that out? I don't know.
Say that.
I'll bonk that. All right. If I can make it work properly. Mike, what gives?
My apologies that this was probably an incomplete explanation. I do use a speed square in conjunction with my shooting board. The trick is to rip a 1/4-inch wide groove along near the opposite edge of your shooting board, opposite the side that your plane is resting, and that wide base of the speed square will register right in that 1/4-inch groove.
Does it fit tightly in there?
It depends on the quality and consistency of the manufacture of your square. I tend to buy the plastic ones because I have to sort of clip off the little pointy edge, and it's easier to do that on plastic. I do find for the most part they're either comfortably slidey to a little bit stiff. And actually, you don't mind a little bit of slop. You think, well, maybe is that going to throw me off 45? Not really, because it really registers against the fence itself. So that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to pivot. And also, on my shooting boards that I make and that I teach, I stole the trick from Matt, where instead of doing a fixed fence at dead on 90, which I used to do, and it was never exactly dead on 90, I now use an adjustable fence. And what I find that even if you're square, and I find the squares to be really, really close to 45, but even if for some reason it's not, just by adjusting very slightly the angle of your fence that it butts up to, you get enough sort of wiggle room to slightly adjust that 45-degree cut. So run a groove and stick that fat part in there. So that fat part, which was your problem, it's now your best friend.
Right on. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's see. I think it's...
And by the way, I didn't think that up. That came from my buddy Sean in Raleigh, North Carolina. So he actually sent that in as a methods of work tip. It was the winner of that issue. And
surprise.
And I use that all the time. So thanks, Sean.
All right, let's get to some comments. This one is from Zipzilla on iTunes. Wanted to thank you for the great and immensely enjoyable podcast. As a professional woodworker, I enjoy all the various segments and also the banter that your personalities bring to the table. As for the naysayers who keep telling you to lose the humor, there's an old saying that ends with, everyone has one. A little bit of advice.
My goodness.
If you don't like the banter, don't listen. Pretty simple choice, really. For me, I'll keep enjoying all you guys bring to the table, especially the smooth moves. Got to laugh to keep from crying. And then Spinning Wood Studio says, great podcast. I've been working my way through the back episodes on my commute to and from work and learned something new from each episode. Really love the interviews with woodworkers around the country. Keep up the great work. Stay snarky, stay sharp. Hashtag. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Tune in again in 2 weeks on July 22nd, 2016 for our next episode. Please spread the word about Shop Talk Live to your woodworking friends and neighbors. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes, and while you're there, please give us the highest 5-star rating. And don't forget to leave your comments. Finally, you can keep up with fine woodworking on Instagram and on Facebook. And look for us all on Instagram as well. Thanks for listening, and have fun in the shop.
How can you give someone the highest 5-star rating? I mean, a 5-star rating is a 5-star rating. That needs to get changed. We're a magazine. We have editors here.
Done. And
I think they mean the highest rating, which is 5 stars, or give us 5 stars, which is the highest rating.
That's the way it's been said probably the entire time we've done the podcast.
It's Ed.
Yeah.
Ed.
Ed was barely literate. Barely literate.